When we were first married and moved to Hemphill, Linda tried real hard to be the perfect homemaker. So she was going to cook me a home-cooked meal. So one of the first meals she cooked for me, that's just a standard meal, nothing really special about it, but there was this bowl there, and I didn't know what was in it. And it kind of had a gravy on it or something like that. And I took a spoon and I stuck it down in there and did it like that, and there was big lumps in it. And I said, she's made me some creamed potatoes, lumps of potatoes and all that. No, it turned out that was the gravy for the potatoes. She didn't know how to make gravy without putting big lumps in it at the time, because she was really a new cook. But we lived right next door to my grandmother, and she and Linda got along great. And so she taught her how to make non-lumpy gravy. And so she and Linda bonded real closely after that. Dad was born in Hemphill. Grew up in a family that ran the general store in town, the only general store in the entire county at the time, in East Texas, Sabine County, that started in the 1890s, way back. And the general store would have, of course, a grocery side that was the only grocery store in the area. It would have a hardware side, so nails, bolts, whatever you needed along those lines. It would have an equipment side. You could buy tractors there, for example. It had a little bit of everything that we now divide into individual stores.
It's a Walmart.
It was the Walmart of the time. That's a good way to phrase it.
What was the name of it?
Toole Mercantile Co. The building was finally torn down about 10 years ago, and they turned it into a parking lot. It had gotten in such severe disrepair that it wasn't worth refurbishing, although they tried. They finally gave up and got rid of it. Dad was the one that was the striver. That he was the one that wanted to move forward. He was the one that wanted to learn new things, do new things. And when he was in high school, his grandfather, who was called Big Papa, was also his namesake. So my dad was a junior from his grandfather. So my dad would, before school, would ride a horse outside of town to my grandfather's land, who let him farm it for cotton. He would plow the fields in the morning, go to school, come back in the afternoon, and continue to work the fields. First year he did that, at about age 15, he said he made an enormous amount of money. Cotton prices were up. I said, what's an enormous amount of money? And he said, back then, $500 was about what he made. And he said he thought he was the richest man in the world. Back then, $500 bought a lot more than it does today. So then he asked his mentor, his grandfather, he had said, Big Papa, what do I do with this money? He said, well, let's invest it in cotton futures. He said, cotton's doing extremely well right now. He invested in cotton futures and lost the whole thing. The whole $500 was gone. But my dad never gave up on whatever he did. Whatever he decided to do, money was always important. He realized the value of having money. He'd been through the Depression. That had a big effect on him, obviously, although he never went hungry because they owned the general store. Mom's childhood, of extremely poor family. Her dad was a barber in town, and they went through the Depression, and things were so bad for them that they couldn't afford to buy meat. So they used to work deals to get my mom to go to friends' house that were better well-to-do, so she'd get a little better cuisine than just beans and rice or whatever it was. So she struggled and struggled and struggled. She didn't go to college. She and Dad went through high school together, same year, and were boyfriend, girlfriend, for all I know, all the way through. And then Mom went to work, actually, at local jobs around when she got out of high school. She worked at the wholesale distributorship for Texaco, which was in the area at the time. And we'll get back into that one. That's also important later in their lives, at a later point in the story. Going through the Depression, Dad's, I think, financial ideas were shaped more by the Depression than so many people practically starving to death. So when he and Mom got married, they had a pact that they would save 50% of everything they earned, and they would do whatever it took to put that in the bank. Sometimes there wasn't money enough for food because they never violated the 50% rule. And she talked about getting ketchup and turning it into tomato soup, and that was their meal. And warm it up, and that was a meal some nights. So they made a lot of sacrifices along the way. What I learned from that is two things. One is tenacity, because once Dad decided, after thinking about it extensively, that something was important, almost nothing would deter him from getting that goal, to doing those things. He paid a price for it. He and I weren't very close. So to me, it's very important to be close to family. But I understand where he's coming from. I understand how he got to the point and the ideas that he had toward those philosophies. And so I think that's really important today for people to understand that tenacity produces results if it's grounded on good principles and has a future. So my dad finally got to a point where he was doing extremely well in life and continued the 50% rule until it wasn't necessary anymore. And he used it to buy land, and mostly is what he invested in. He did invest in the stock market and did well there too, lost money but made money. So he had amassed quite a bit of land by the time he retired at about age 70. So he got a chance to buy a 160-acre tract a couple of miles outside of town, and it had an old one-bedroom frame house on it. But it had electricity and had a water well and had a restroom. So my friends and I would go out there and spend the night. And like Earl and Jimmy and I played Moon all the time. We'd do stuff like that. And, of course, once in a while there was a little alcohol involved. So we went out there and enjoyed doing that and getting out in there. So that was my earliest connection with what's now called in our family the tree farm. And it was all virgin timber out there at that time. They weren't harvesting and collecting timber much in that area. They were, but not where we were. So it was an enjoyable time to get out and enjoy the nature, but there were very few trails through it. It was difficult to get through it. It was kind of overgrown in places, most of the places. So it was our first attempt there. The house eventually burned down when no one was there. And as we have now gone back into that area and we're using it and all, we found what was the old home site. We've decided, because of a few artifacts we found and because of my mother's daylilies that she planted. Actually, my grandmother's daylilies that my mother transplanted there, and they're still growing up in the wild out there. So we've decided we found the old home site, but we, of course, can't find the well or anything. Had to dig a new well and all that stuff when we built the house and all. So getting Dad to college was a story in itself. His parents at this point couldn't afford to help him with schooling at all. There were no student loans available. It was just you do it yourself or you don't do it. He was determined to go to college. He picked A&M, and he and two of his friends, I think one of them was a cousin, decided they were all going to A&M, but they didn't have transportation from East Texas, bus-wise or any way to get there. So the three of them pooled $5 apiece and bought a Model T Ford for $15. And it didn't run, but they managed to get it going and started for A&M right out of high school. So in June, they started to go to A&M school. It was going to start in September. It took them 5 days to get to College Station, a total of maybe 300 miles away, because it kept breaking down. They'd have to stop and fix it, repair the tires, whatever it was. They didn't have any money for any place to sleep. They slept in people's barns and on the side of the road, wherever they could on the way. Got to College Station, sold it for $15. They had $5 a piece. It's all the money he had going. No money for tuition yet. No idea of where he was going to get it. He just knew he was going to make it work. So he went to the dairy barn at A&M, and the guys were very receptive. They let him sleep there. He lived on milk for a while because he wasn't going to spend his $5. He knew he needed that for something. So he went to the dean of the school. He just went up and boldly knocked on the door. He said, I want to go to school here. And he said, I've been accepted to start in the fall, but he said, I have no money for tuition. no money for an apartment, anything. I hope you can give me a job. And he did. The dean arranged for him to get jobs, odd jobs around campus and stuff, and he would work 7 days a week when they'd let him to make money. He graduated from college in 36. So he managed to put enough money together to get to pay the tuition and so forth, and worked his way all the way through school. Never received any money from home. Graduated from there 4 years later. From there, he knew he wanted to marry Mom, but he decided that he did not want to do it until he had some money. So he got jobs and earned money, and he told her he wasn't going to marry her until he had $500 in the bank, which he did. They didn't have a car. They got married by a relative who was a preacher in Nacogdoches, 60 miles away. They rode the bus down to the Warwick Hotel in Houston, and that's where they spent their honeymoon, rode the bus back home. And over time, he got a job then working for a company that sent him to Olney, Illinois, which is where I was born. He graduated from A&M with a second lieutenant's rating because everything was military back then. But the things internationally were heating up toward World War II, and he realized that. And his unit, he was basically in a reserve unit as a second lieutenant. So he resigned his commission because he knew he felt his unit was going to be called up, and sure enough, it was. And so he didn't have to go. But had he been drafted after that, he would have gone in as a ground soldier, basically. He would have not been an officer. So then as the war was heating up and December 7th, 41 was getting close, he decided he needed to work for a company that could get him an exemption, hopefully, from the war. So he went to work for Dow Chemical in Freeport, Texas. My sister, Sheila, was born there. I remember Freeport a little bit. We moved away from there when I was 6. So my dad always wanted to have an edge on something else. So we had chickens in the backyard for eggs and kill the chickens for fried chicken and so forth. So he always was doing a little something else to improve the quality of life to the point that he could back there. I remember one time they decided to have a New Year's Eve party. It's one of my first memories, but they didn't have a babysitter for my sister and me. So he parked the car out to the side of the house where the main road went by. We lived on a corner. And he told us that it would be really cool for us to honk our horn at all the cars that went by because that was a popular thing to do on New Year's Eve. So that kept us out in the car for several hours while they were having a party inside. One of the big problems was the next day the car wouldn't start because the battery was dead because we had run all the energy out of the battery. So that's one of my only memories. From there, he stayed there until the war was over. Then we moved to Houston and lived there in a duplex at 1818 Branard Street. And the reason I remember that is later on I ended up living there too part-time.
What was fun for little Ron at this time? What would you do? How did you fill up your time?
Well, it was simpler times back then, and so there weren't like restrictions on we had to stay in the house all day and all that. They would turn us loose and we'd go anywhere we wanted, met a lot of the kids in the neighborhood. We'd go to people's houses and make up games and play ball in the streets and whatever we could do. There was one movie theater that was walking distance away by those standards. It was about 10 blocks away, and it was across a major street, and it was in Houston, in the middle of Houston. But we were allowed to do it. Traffic wasn't as bad, and we were taught safety and then released to go do it, and never really got in trouble doing it. So what happened after that was he got a chance to talk to the guy who ran the Texaco distributorship in Hemphill, where Mother had worked at one point as a secretary. And so he bought that distributorship, and we moved to Hemphill when I was about 8, about 1948. And so I grew up there in Hemphill, graduated from Hemphill High School. It was a transition. I was blown away with the openness of everything. The house that we lived in there, a very old house that had been built about 1916, Dad bought that along with the business from the man that owned the wholesale gasoline business. And it was on 7 acres. Never had seen any land I could roam on. Had a little pond down at the bottom with some fish in it. And so I was introduced to fishing and so forth. I just couldn't believe that this existed in the world. I wasn't aware of it up until that point. But I really enjoyed it and embraced it. The city of Hemphill was so easy to live in the sense that there were no burglaries, anything like that going on, that Mom and Dad had the same laissez-faire attitude toward me. I just went wherever I went and spent the day and be home for dinner at 6, whatever, and I was. We had a telephone at that time on the wall that had a ringer, and you'd call Central and you'd tell them what number you wanted to talk to. It was hanging on the wall, and you had a separate earpiece and mouthpiece on it. And because it went through Central and there was only one operator, by telling who were calling whom, the operator knew everything going on in town. And so if Mom needed me at an odd time, she wouldn't have any idea where I was. She'd call Central and say, "Do you know where Ronnie might be?" Well, he talked to his friend Jimmy. He may have gone on out there. And so then she'd call out there and find me and tell me to come home or whatever. Very simple times back then. Getting back to nature and the simplicity of nature and seeing what God created, if you take the time to stop and look, is very fulfilling. It beats the heck out of watching TV, and in my opinion. What has surprised me with this place that we have in East Texas is how much my kids and my grandkids have recognized that benefit and how much they enjoy going back up to our place that we call the Tree Farm in Hemphill. There are big modern advances that are huge and important in today's life. Heart transplants weren't available back then, et cetera, et cetera. So modernization of our society is a big plus in many ways. So people are living longer. We know how to take better care of ourselves. But back then, the simplicity of life and the necessity to talk to people, because there was no cell phones, there was no iPads, no internet, none of that stuff existed. We developed closer friendships, I think, than the kids today. We really got to know each other because we had time to do that. So, yeah, there's huge advantages to being there. Every time I go to the tree farm, I always find something else I hadn't seen before or noticed, because we have enough land and enough different places to go that it's helped me get back to looking at the splendor God created in the world. And it's helped me appreciate it more. I love going up there myself. And sometimes Greg and I will go up there by ourselves and do projects and spend time together. So once I recognized that my dad and I didn't have much closeness, it was important to me to try to be close to my kids. And so I've tried to do that as best I could. And Greg and I end up having a lot of similar things we like to do and want to do together. So that's helped a bunch there too. Mom was very laissez-faire. It was just pretty much, if you don't get in trouble, everything's fine and I'm smiling and we're having a good time. Dad was a disciplinarian when he needed to be. He didn't make the decisions on that. If we got in some kind of trouble where we needed to be spanked, well, when Dad came home, she told him and he spanked us. So that was kind of the way that went. Mostly my mother was my parent. My parents didn't go to church a whole lot, but I don't know where, but somewhere in there I got the idea that I wanted to go to church. So there was a church about 2 or 3 blocks away, and I found out when they started their services, and I started going there by myself. My parents didn't even know I did it right at first. I went there, went to Sunday school and church there, and that was kind of the background of my religious beliefs, is what I kind of did on my own, and I really don't remember why I got started. Maybe a friend went there and invited me, I don't know. And then when I got to Hemphill, my maternal grandparents were both the son and daughter, respectively, of Baptist ministers, and so they were big into religion. So my grandfather would come over and pick me up and take me to church and Sunday school and church, me and my sister. My grandparents that took us to church on Sunday always had us over Sunday afternoon, and we always had fried chicken and French fries routinely every Sunday while I was growing up. Our meals at home, the other meals other than the Sunday afternoon thing, were basically a big breakfast in the morning, and then on non-school days we'd have a lunch at home. The food was much more simple. People weren't as much into proper nutrition, so there are a lot of fried foods, a lot of vegetables, but a lot of fried foods. When I was probably 10 or so, Dad was doing well enough that we had a maid. And the maid was a great cook. Mother was a fair cook. Even though she had no college, she was also kind of an entrepreneur a little bit, and she taught herself to be an architect. And she was the only one in the county, and she drew house plans for dozens of people. And so she ended up drawing the plans for a new Methodist church, which they built. It was really unique in many ways. And she had the plans reproduced at a place in Houston, the blueprints made, basically. And an architectural firm saw the plans accidentally, contacted her, and got permission to use her design. They built a huge Methodist church here in Hemphill, in Houston somewhere. I've lost track of where that is, but Mother and I actually attended it one time just because we'd heard that it was there, and so they followed her plans through that. So her design wasn't a bad design. When my current wife, Sylvia, was married for the first time, she and Mom were real close, and so when they could afford to build their own house, Mom designed the plans for them to build their own house because she was still real close to Sylvia. And Sylvia tells me the stories, and I knew it existed anyway, about how my mom didn't want to waste 1 square inch of space. Everything, can I get a shelf in there? Well, you're going to need to have a little more storage, so we don't want to waste this space. So everything was designed about efficiency. That was her expertise. She and Dad loved to play bridge, and they had bridge clubs in Hemphill then. Believe it or not, back in then, they'd have 3 or 4 tables of bridge on a regular basis. And that was basically the social part of that. They did start a garden club. Mom was involved in that, where they learned to arrange flowers and grow flowers and things. But that was pretty much it for Hemphill socially, was the bridge. My dad was always very practical and wanted to be organized and get ahead of the game. So he found out a brand of perfume that was a little bit expensive, but my mother loved it. So he bought a case, and he kept it up at the warehouse, and she didn't know about it originally. And so if it was Christmas, if it was a birthday, if it was whatever, she got a bottle of that perfume out of the case. He didn't have to go shopping. He didn't have to spend any time doing anything else. It was a simple way to solve the problem. Give her a nice gift. So that's basically the story on my dad. My dad was a workaholic, worked all the time. He and I never got really close. But, I mean, we had a congenial relationship. We didn't have any problems, really. I went to work for him at about age 11. When we'd been in Houston, my dad always wanted to do other things. He had his 8-to-5 job. But on the side, back then there was no air conditioning. Nobody had air conditioning in the 40s much. So everybody used fans. And so he worked out a deal with a wholesale fan manufacturer in Houston to buy the parts and assemble the fans and sell them basically in want ads in the paper. So he had a secondary business going of that. He got into another business of refurbishing cars, and started a car dealership, a car repair business on the side too, until his partner absconded with all the funds, so that fell apart. When we moved to Hemphill, when I was about 10, he kept the fan business as a sideline business. And so he, even though they were declining in need and sales, there was still a lot of them. So he put me on an assembly line that he created for me in one of his warehouses, putting fans together at age 10. So that was my first job, working up there with him. Hemphill was way behind academically in the 3rd grade that the school in Houston had been that I had attended. So we got there about in April, so it was maybe 3 months of school. There was absolutely nothing to learn for me in those 3 months. And there were times when the teacher would start talking about something that I knew a lot about from previous schooling, and I would start injecting things. And so I don't think she liked me too much because I was always saying stuff. She wanted to have her curriculum, and I was throwing other things into the curriculum, but we got along. It worked out. I ended up being salutatorian of a class of 30, so that didn't say much. It was fun in many ways. The freedom that was there, the school systems back in then, even in Houston, were so much more relaxed than they are today. They got a volume of kids. They have to control them. They have to do these things now. Back then, smaller school, fewer students, they could be more relaxed, and I think that had value too. When I was about 11, my dad took an old 1946 Ford in as the security on a debt that was defaulted on from someone he'd loaned money to, and it didn't run. So we hauled it up there, and I said, Dad, what are you going to do with that car? And he laughingly said to me, well, it doesn't run. If you can get it run, you can have it. I said, yeah, okay. Of course, he was joking. Well, I had a friend a couple of years older that his dad was a mechanic, and he'd grown up doing mechanic work. And so he came over and helped me diagnose the problems. I was working for 25 cents an hour, but even back then that added up to enough money I could buy a water pump and a motor mount and the different things I needed. So one afternoon after school, we got it running. I was 11 years old. I said, well, Dad said I could have the car if I could get it running. It's running. So I drove it home. Never had a driving lesson in my life. Got it home. Dad came home that day from work, and he said, how'd that car get here? And I said, I got it running, and I brought it home. He said, well, give me the keys. He said, you're not going to drive it anymore until we have a few lessons. So he started taking me out on Sunday afternoons, which was the only day he didn't work in the week, until he felt I was competent to drive the car. So at age 12, I had my own car in school. And it was a 1946 Ford, no air conditioning, no radio, had a rusted out place in the floorboard in the right front passenger seat that I put a piece of plywood over so your feet wouldn't go through and drag in the pavement. And so I got real popular because I was the only one with a car in my age group. Got a driver's license at 14, and then I was legal. By 16, I was delivering gas and gas trucks to gas stations, which you can't do anymore because I didn't have commercial license and hazmat license and all the stuff that's now required. Well, I didn't get in trouble much in high school. In spite of all the freedom they gave me, I really didn't do anything really too stupid. My two friends, Jimmy and Earl, would sometimes, the three of us were kind of running buddies, and we got together a lot. And one particular weekend when I was probably 15, 16, Mom and Dad were out of town for some reason, and they had no qualms with leaving me at home by myself. So I invited Jimmy and Earl to come spend the night with me. We decided about 6, 7 o'clock we were going to go to the local hamburger place and get a burger. So we started out the back door, and my sister Charlotte had a little hamster in a cage on the back door. And the hamster had gotten out, and it had gotten out before. So when it gets out, you got to stop right then. Your chance of catching it, it'll be closer if you catch it soon after it gets out. So I told them, I said, hey guys, just bring me a burger, and I'm going to look for this hamster. So they left. They were gone 2 hours, and I couldn't figure out why it took them so long to get a burger. Well, it turned out Jimmy had gotten a new high-powered BB pistol, and Jimmy and Earl went around shooting out streetlights in Hemphill. Well, because Jimmy's pickup got recognized, everybody knew everybody. He got reported to the police as being the one shooting out the lights. Then they called his dad. His dad said, no, he's spending the night with Ron. So I got called in. So we got called down to the sheriff's department, and nobody believed me that I wasn't involved. My best teachers were in the area of math, an excellent math teacher. Actually, one teacher that I took all my math courses from because they didn't have a lot of different teachers in a small school. My science, I was interested in it, very poor teachers. I remember going to chemistry class for 9 months, and we got to page 35 in the book. I started talking to my dad, and I said, I really got a problem here, Dad. I said, I want to go to college, but I said, I know I'm not getting the basics, especially like in chemistry. I said, that's 0 that I got out of that, except what I've been able to learn a little bit on my own. I said, that's not going to be enough. I get to college, I'm not going to be able to do this. It turned out there was a chemistry teacher from A&M who'd retired in the Hemphill area that my dad knew about. So he got permission from the school board for us to go up at night and use the chemistry lab. And this guy went up and taught me one-on-one a college freshman course in chemistry when I was in high school. Of course, I don't get any credit for it, but I knew the material. So we could use the chemistry lab. We could do the experiments to the extent they were available at this very limited lab. And so I ended up being able to supplement enough to get by in that way and go to college without flunking out. And it turned out at the University of Texas, chemistry was one of the flunk out courses. They got rid of a lot of the freshmen by them not being able to pass chemistry. But with my background, I sailed through it, made an A in that with no problem. We did a lot of camping. My parents didn't care. So there was a lake not too far away that was built in the 40s, one of the work camp projects, I think, from around the World War II era. My dad had an old Jeep, an old Willis Jeep, and he didn't care if I took it, so when we went camping, we usually went in the Jeep. And my other friends would maybe drive their cars up there, but it wasn't very far, 10 miles less. So we did a lot of that during that time. The kids learned things from each other. Like the friend I was telling about earlier that was the mechanic's son, he taught me a lot about car stuff when we'd have these kind of times together. We'd talk about all kinds of stuff because there was no social media going on while we were tent camping. We would try our hand at cooking over a campfire and with all the disasters that occurred. But it was fun. It was, if you spilled the grease on the ground, it didn't matter. You clean it up best you could and move on. It was fine. So we did a lot of that. And I think the lack of modern conveniences during that whole time period in my life forced me to look for things to do. I wasn't one to sit down and just sit and let the world pass me by. I wanted to be busy. I wasn't much in the dating scene in high school. Oh, I kissed a girl or something a couple of times maybe, but had maybe 10 or 15 dates all total in high school is about it. Just not a lot of choice. I had a lot of friends. I had a lot of girls that were friends, and some of them I've seen for years since as a friend. But there wasn't much dating back then. Rarely was there a dance or anything, except the school would have one once in a while, and I'd go to those. But I played sports a little bit. I was small for my age, tried to play basketball, way too small for that. That didn't work at all. Played volleyball, played baseball. I really enjoyed baseball. I was in the band. I started out playing a trombone because I was there when they started the band, and I wanted to play trumpet, but they had a bunch of trumpet players already, so I started out playing the trombone. Didn't like it as much, but I played it for quite a few years. Then I decided by this time I was saving a little money working for my dad, and so I wanted to move to trumpet. So I asked my dad if he'd bought me my trombone. I asked him if he'd let me trade this in and buy a trumpet, if he'd help me with that, and he said no. He said, I bought you one instrument, that's enough. So I ended up buying a really top-of-the-line trumpet. The band director made a deal with the band company in Beaumont. He bought it, basically, and then I paid him back when I could. So I paid my $200 to him over time to have a trumpet to play. Sheila is 2.5 years younger than me, and we were too close, so we fought all the time. Didn't like each other at all. We're now close friends, but at the time, no. There were two batches of kids, my sister and I, and then quite a few years in there, and then my second sister, who's 11 years younger than me, and 2 years later, a brother under that. My brother was so far down that when I left to go to college at 18, he was about 3 or 4, so I didn't really get to know him very well. Never really spent much time with him. When he was in the summer between his freshman and sophomore year in college, he was killed in an auto accident. So I never really became close to my brother. So I have my two sisters. My younger sister, Charlotte, and I were really bonded, really, really close. And I had a car. And when I wasn't into after-school sports and stuff, I would come home after school and pick her up. She loved doing it. She would stand up in the car seat beside me, put her left arm around my neck. There were no seat belts. And I'd drive her up to the local Dairy Queen to visit with my friends, get a burger. And she thought she was big stuff because she was seeing all the big kids. She was playing with the big kids. And they all loved her. And so they all paid attention to her. And so she and I got very close and still are. And then, of course, that feeds over into the story of Sylvia, my current wife.
Right.
Sylvia and my sister Charlotte, Sylvia's 11 years younger than me, they were best friends since first grade. And then another story in there about Sylvia and Charlotte was that Sylvia lived on a farm. Her dad died when she was about 2, and she was raised mostly by her grandparents, while her mother went somewhere else to make a living and would come home on weekends and stuff. And so she lived outside of town, and her her grandparents didn't want to come get her for extracurriculars like in the band and band practice after school, and then you couldn't ride the bus home and so forth. After I left for college, Sylvia literally moved into my house during the week. She would come stay with my sister Monday through Thursday, and then Friday she would go back home for the weekend. So my mother became her second mother. My mother passed away before Sylvia and I got married, but we've always joked about Mom's probably up there just tickled to death. My dad didn't push me, but at the time A&M was strictly military, and that did not appeal to me. But I know I wanted to go to a larger school. I'd had the small school experience with high school, and I wanted to see what meeting more people and having more opportunities to grow personally with other interactions would be like. So I wanted to go to a large school. Baylor was expensive, and although my dad probably could have afforded it, I knew he was frugal enough that I'd get some resistance there, so that didn't get to be a consideration, and it just seemed like the logical choice for me to go to Austin. I was concerned that Dad might be negative on that because he went to A&M, but he wasn't. He really didn't seem to care where I went, which surprised me when we got into that discussion. He was a very quiet person. He didn't express his opinion all that much. And he just made a statement, something to the effect that, well, there's special things about A&M, but there's special things about every school. He was more relaxed about it. I think with all the hype that goes on at A&M now about camaraderie and school competitions and all that, I think the hype and stuff now is much higher than it was when he went back in the 30s. That's my guess. We did bring him up here one time when my oldest daughter was graduating, and he got to walk around campus and see all the new stuff, and he really seemed to enjoy that a lot. It brought back a lot of memories for him too. But in terms of his adamancy about what I did, he wanted me to go to school. He wanted me to go to a big school because that's what I had told him I wanted. As a freshman, you couldn't have a car until you were a sophomore. Unless you had a B average after your first semester, then you could get it for the second semester. So I lived in a private dorm 6 or 8 blocks from campus for the first semester, and then I had a good average, and so I got my car the second half of my freshman year and had one from then on. The cars I had progressed through, I had the 46 Ford I talked about, and my dad put me through a series of used autos that upgraded me from time to time. After about the third car, I finally got to an automatic transmission, and, and it had air conditioning, about the fourth car had air conditioning. So anyway, I had an older but in pretty good shape car. The campus was much smaller, less than 20,000 students. You could actually drive and park on campus, so I could live further out and drive in and park on campus. You know, the tower and everything was already there. That's been there forever. And Littlefield Fountain and, a lot of things are still there like they were. My dad supplied enough money for me to subsist on and live on. I always had a job somewhere doing something, making a little extra money. And that was my play money, whatever I could make. I loved the lake and go up to Lake Travis. There were places you could overlook the lake and loved hanging out up there. Had a few dates that we went up to the lake and overlooked the lake, basically. A friend of mine named Colin, was big into boats, and he had refurbished a Century inboard. He could go to Lake Austin with that because it's close to town, and so we used to go out there and water ski. Even back then, I wasn't skiing the course and competition and all that, but I was skiing on a slalom ski behind the Century inboard on Lake Austin. So I did that a lot in the appropriate part of the year. And I enjoyed it, but it wasn't a passion for me at that point. It was good exercise. It was fun. I don't remember it being very hard. I guess my balance was good enough or whatever. But it continued to be a part of our family as time went on. When I had my own boat later and had a family, we did a lot of that. I kind of had developed a philosophy when I headed to college that even though my dad wasn't very outspoken about it, I kind of liked a lot of his philosophies that I had learned accidentally in planning your life out a little bit. Don't just go through life and let it happen. Get some goals, get some ideas. How do you want to go with things? When I went to college first, I was signed up pre-med, pre-dent. Then what happened was that my grandfather that I was close to, my maternal grandfather, he got thyroid cancer. He was in MD Anderson in Houston, and when I was a freshman, I'd come back and see him from time to time, just spend some time with him. He was there for 6 or 8 months. And I'd always leave the hospital feeling depressed. And I said, do I really want to work in a medical environment where I'm going home depressed at the end of the day? A lot of these people die, and that's not what I want to do. And talked to the local physician in Hemphill about it. Had talked to him about it before, and even at age 16, he got me into a delivery to see if I could handle the blood and everything that's involved in that. And I'd handled that fine, so that part of it wasn't going to bother me, but the depression part bothered me. I wanted to enjoy my life. A friend of mine from Hemphill, a couple of years older than me, had just gotten into dental school. So he talked me into coming down and let him show me around the dental school. And I'd always liked to work with my hands. And I got interested in that. So I went back to college my sophomore year and changed from pre-med to pre-dent, which actually were the same requirements, so I didn't lose anything. In college, it wasn't organized. Like I had a regular job that happened every time. I took odd jobs when I could find them from whomever, mow grass or whatever I could do. I did get one regular job, and that's related to the flying thing. But the guy that became our faculty sponsor was also head of the physics department at UT. And so he got me a job working in the physics lab that I worked anywhere from 10 to 20 hours a week. As I got into physics in college, one of the examples that was given was about the airflow difference over airplane wings and how that creates lift and lifted it. And that fascinated me. Just the concept got my attention. I said, it doesn't make sense that this could work. Obviously it does. They got big airplanes carrying lots of weight. So obviously it was, but how does that work? And I just kind of went out and wanted to experiment with it just to get a feel for it, just because of the fascination I got over the concept of the lift of the wing. They had a Longhorn Flying Club. I got out there and took a couple of lessons when money would allow me to do so, and got really interested in it. And so one of the things you do in your student pilot's license is you have to take a solo cross country. It has to be over 100 miles. And back then they didn't have all the sophisticated GPSs and things to transfer with, so there were ways to triangulate and figure out kind of where you were with a system called the Omni system, but you mostly had to do dead reckoning, saying, oh, there's a water tower, that's probably this town, and so this is where I am. East Texas was a couple of 100 miles away, so that would qualify for my thing. So I took the Cessna 140, a two-seater airplane with tail dragger, was the best airplane the flying club had at the time. So I flew up there because a friend of mine had a dental practice there in Hemphill, and he had kind of taken over this field. It was an unofficial airport, but he kind of said, this will work. And so he told me it was there. And so I went to an unofficial airport, which I really wasn't supposed to do as a student pilot. But I went there and landed. The problem was on takeoff, he didn't tell me about the ditch. It was covered with grass. And on takeoff, I hit the ditch, flipped the airplane upside down, crushed the vertical stabilizer, tore the airplane up pretty badly, didn't get hurt. So I got in real trouble about that. But that was the best airplane the flying club had. They had a J3 Piper Cub, and they had this airplane. This airplane wasn't insured. So the club was essentially bankrupt when this happened. And as I'd been going out to the airport, I'd met this physics professor, the one I got the job from eventually, and he was getting into aviation. And so he was single, talked him into co-signing a note for the club to buy a brand new 150, which is a two-seater tricycle gear airplane, very popular, good training airplane. So we bought that. The word got around that we had a fine airplane, and the people flocked in droves. I became treasurer the next year, and then the year after that, I was president of the club. When I left, when I got out of school and went to dental school, we were up to 2 172s and 4 150s. What started out as a disaster turned out to be the best thing that ever happened to the club, forced us to get further along, forced us to get new airplanes and move forward. And people came out of the woodwork that wanted to fly. Yeah, I went from UT in Austin to UT Dental School in Houston. I had an aunt here that had a garage apartment. And so she rented a garage apartment to me. So I lived driving distance from the school, not walking, but driving distance from the school. So I lived there for a couple of years. My dad had kept the duplex at 1818 Branard Street and had rented it out all these years. So after I lived with my aunt for a couple of years, well, he was helping me he was paying most of my expenses, so he was paying for it. And he said, "We got an empty place over here. I'm not paying rent anymore. You're moving over there." So I lived in 1818 Branard Street for a couple of years. The whole curriculum, the school, the physical plant, everything was well designed. We had 100 students in a class. We had 25 labs with 4 students to a lab. And that was your home base all day. It was in the lab. And from there, you'd go to classrooms for classwork. It was just fascinating to me. Went to school 39 hours a week, went basically 8 to 5. So it was, I really, really enjoyed it. My manual dexterity skills improved dramatically during this time. They had a closed circuit TV camera system that went to all the labs, and like the freshmen would be on one floor, sophomores would be on another floor, but still in a 4-man lab, 25 lab configuration. And so there would be all kind of presentations, like if we were doing what was called Crown and Bridge, and we were going into a new section to learn about Crown and Bridge. Well, then they would have an audiovisual room where they would show the lesson basically to the people in all the labs instead of having to go to a classroom, because they were doing a lot of demonstrations. You could see a lot better with the cameras because you could zoom in and so forth. And I got a job working in there. So when they'd put on a presentation for our class, well, then I was the cameraman basically that ran that. And so I was seeing it while I was doing it, so I didn't miss anything. Money was a big issue. I didn't want to spend a lot of money, and I'd had the philosophy that I wasn't going to get serious about a girl until I was nearly through with dental school. A strange thing happened that allowed me to fly more, and that was my aunt that I'd originally lived in her garage apartment started dating. She was single, started dating a guy who'd previously hadn't flown for 15 or 20 years. I got to talking to him about the new electronics that was available, new to him, like Omni navigation, for example. And so I helped him find an airplane, and he got his pilot's license back or updated or whatever he did. So he'd let me fly the plane for gas and oil. So I didn't even have to pay anything to fly his plane. I decided, okay, I'm a senior now. It's okay to get serious about a girl. I do want a wife. I do want a family. And so I started thinking about the girls that I knew and the ones I was dating, and nothing really sounded, this is going to work out type thing. And so I called Joe, who was married to my sister at the time, and said, "Hey, any way you and Fred can arrange for me to have a couple of blind dates, I'll come up there." And so he said, "Yeah, Fred knows this lady that's big in the sorority, and she can probably find you a couple of dates." Joe was going to law school in Austin, so he was still there. And Fred was too. So I flew the Bonanza up there, and I stayed with my friend Colin that I had done the Century inboard skiing with and so forth. And so I had a date on Friday night, and the Friday night date, we got along great, had a great time. And she hinted that she didn't have a date on Saturday night. She wanted to go out again. So Saturday morning, I called Joe, who called Fred, and I said, "Is there any way I can get out of my Saturday night date?" I said, I can't get lucky 2 nights in a row. I mean, have 2 good dates. I said, "Can you get me out of it?" Well, so Fred called around. He couldn't get hold of this girl. Well, it turned out that my date for Saturday night also had an old boyfriend that came in town. So Saturday morning, she tried to get in touch with Fred to cancel the date with me so she could go out with her old boyfriend. But there were no cell phones back then. There were only landlines, and nobody had answering machines. You couldn't leave a message. Communications didn't go through. And I ended up having to go out with my Saturday night date, who turned out to be Linda, my kid's mother. And we ended up getting married eventually. So lack of cell phones. If there'd been cell phones, I never would have met Linda. So it's funny how things change and what causes what to happen. So I had made a date also for the girl from Friday night to take her flying. She wanted to go flying, so I was going to take her flying Sunday morning before I headed back, about 8 or 9 o'clock. And then I had such a great time with Linda and was mesmerized with her, but I had this other date Sunday morning. So I took the girl out flying and went and picked Linda up. We went to church together, and I took Linda flying in the afternoon, and then took her, then flew back home that day. So the airplane facilitated significantly me spending time with Linda. And then what happened after that, that was in the fall, and when it got close to Christmas, my friend from Hemphill, the dentist that had to fly at the local field, he was going to go fly up to Kansas and pick up a friend of ours who was getting out of school for Christmas break. And so he asked me to fly along with him. And I said, sure, anything to go flying. So we got up there. Strange front came in. We got grounded. We had to try to fly a commercial back from Kansas. We managed to make it back to Dallas and got stuck in Dallas. But I knew a lady, a girl who was going to school in Dallas. And so I called her, and she was still there, but she couldn't leave till the next day to drive back to Hemphill so I could get a ride back to Hemphill. But Linda lived in Dallas. And so I had her phone number. I got in touch with her, went over and met her parents, spent some time with her. Turned out she had to cancel a date when I called her, which she didn't tell me about till after we were married. But she was interested too, and so she wanted to go. So that kind of... we spent a lot of time just talking one-on-one during that one date. And I liked her parents. They seemed to like me. Things started meshing. So then that was around Christmas. So then in January, we talked on the phone a lot. We wrote a lot of letters. There's no texting, no email. So we wrote letters. So we were writing back and forth 2 or 3 times a week. Kept those letters for a lot of years. And I started going to Austin some weekends, staying with Colin. She'd come to Houston, stay with my cousin Diane. And so we spent a lot of weekends together. Then around March, I invited her to come home and meet my parents. So we went home to meet my parents. My friend Bert, that had been a dentist there, had left there and moved to Dallas, but he left all his dental equipment there. And I had already decided I was going to go back there and buy his equipment from him, start my dental practice there. So I took her up to the dental office to show her the dental equipment and the office and what it was going to be like and all this kind of stuff. And she got really excited. I don't know why, but for some reason she got really excited, and it suddenly dawned on me, this lady is really special to me. So I asked her to marry me in the dental office. Just the 2 of us there. So she hesitated before she answered. I later found out why, but she did eventually say yes. And so I said, well, we're still kind of in old school things. I said, do you want me to call and ask your dad for your hand in marriage? And she said, no, I don't want you to do that. That's too old school. We're modern. We don't do that anymore. So she called her parents and told them, and they were very favorable about it. My mom and Linda had bonded amazingly well just over those day or two. They were like old friends before we left for the weekend. So Mother was ecstatic. Why she hesitated because she didn't expect to get to be engaged before she got out. She was a senior at UT. She didn't expect to be engaged. She had already applied for and received the chance to be a stewardess for Branard. And Branard required that all the stewardesses had to be single at the time. She was looking forward to touring the world and expanding her horizons, and that was her hesitation. But she told me later, she said, but one time when she was like a sophomore or junior in high school, she and some of her friends were talking and trying to pick out who would be their ideal person to be married to. And for some reason, she picked a dentist. And the fact that I was a dentist going to be a dentist, and had asked her, and we were getting along so well, and everything was flowing so smoothly, both with her parents and with my parents. She said I really didn't have to hesitate long. I just wanted to make sure I was really making the right decision before she said yes. So that was her hesitation. She wanted to be a stewardess. We got married in July of that same year. So I had known her 9 months maybe. And we got married, of course, in her hometown church in Dallas. And from there we went on a honeymoon we went to what was called a barefoot cruise, which was a huge 150-foot sailboat out of Miami through the Bahamas. And we were on that for a week. That was our honeymoon, quite an interesting experience. Because it was a sailboat and because there was very little wind, they went under auxiliary power a lot of the time, which cruised at maybe 8 knots. So it was a very laid-back trip. We landed back in Miami. Cruise was over. We had an airplane flight back. Had an airline strike. Airplanes were shut down across the whole country. We rode a bus back from Florida to Texas. Kind of a bad experience, but we made it. So we got back okay, and I went back to my practice there. She wasn't feeling well when we got home. She always felt good. She was always healthy, but Linda didn't feel well, and so we didn't think too much about it for a while. Come to find out, she was pregnant.
I was going to ask, how did that happen?
And we found out that the birth control pills she was on, which were brand new ones called Sequins, the next year they took them off the market because they had too many pregnancies. So my oldest is here because Sequins didn't work. So we were raising a child in Hemphill.
When was this?
This would be in 1969. We wanted a family. We already talked about it, but we just weren't quite ready for it right then. We were living in a 400 square foot house at the time, and had one room, one bedroom, one tiny bath, one little kitchen. That was the whole house. And the bedroom was so small that with a double bed in it, you had to walk sideways to get down each side of it between that and the wall. That's how small the bedroom was. So things were kind of tight. So when we found out she's pregnant, we were a little worried about whether or not the doctor in Hemphill, which is apparently very competent, but the hospital wouldn't have anything if there were ever a problem. So she decided she wanted to deliver the baby back in Dallas. Well, 400 square feet wasn't going to be much. But the house belonged to my dad, and we were renting it from him. And it had one window air conditioner mounted in the wall in the main room, but that cooled the house off a little bit. So while she was gone, my dad and I added on a master bedroom, a nursery, a walk-in closet, and an extra bathroom to the house, which tripled the size of the house. So when she brought the baby home finally, came back from Dallas, she was shocked to see a nice place to live instead of where we'd been living in. Everything happened so fast, basically, in that part of our lives. Me being in private dental practice was strange. I had to get used to that. Living in a small house, I had to get used to that. Never been in that. Even in college, I had more room than this. And so there was a lot to get used to. But there were pluses and minuses, too. Life was simpler, like we talked about before. When Laurie was born, my oldest, when she was born, and she brought her home, I was totally enamored. I didn't know what I was going to do as a father. I knew I wanted to be a good father, but I didn't know how, and I didn't know how I was going to react. But I was totally mesmerized. Every second that was possible, I was holding her. She was just, it was like I finally learned how, in this family unit, how much love there can be. It was just really an eye-opening, amazing experience. And it didn't matter about the rest of the world. When the three of us were together at this time, this early in our married life even, it was an eye-opening, wonderful experience. I had a concept in my mind of wanting to have a close family. And not as a rebellion against anything, not as drawing parallels off of anything else earlier in my life, just a concept I had for whatever reason. And I try to do that. As it turned out, as a parent, I was sometimes a little too strict with my firstborn because I didn't know how much latitude I could give her. I knew in the country I was given a ton of latitude, but I didn't know in a city environment whether that's really a good thing or not. So I tended to be a little overly protective now in retrospect. So Lori got the brunt of it. I softened a little bit by the next one and softened a lot by the time I got to Greg. And another thing that happened in there is that my wife, Linda, was teaching at the local elementary school. She taught first grade in special ed. She had a student named Gilbert in the first grade. And she'd come home complaining about him every day. This Gilbert, I cannot control him. Back in these days, you were allowed to paddle the students. You could send them to the principal and get them paddled. So I said, well, have you sent him to the principal to get him paddled? She said, no, I'm going to do that tomorrow. So she came on the next day. She said, didn't work. I said, why didn't it work? She said, well, Gilbert came back and bragged about the fact that the guy didn't hit him very hard and it didn't hurt. And then he kept on being unruly. I said, well, then tomorrow when you send him to get paddled and he comes home, tell him, well, it's supposed to hurt. So if it didn't hurt, I'm going to take you back up there and tell the principal that he didn't hurt you, and so that's not a deterrent, so he needs to fix that problem. So Gilbert settled down a little bit and got to be a little more controllable student. Except Gilbert showed up in my dental practice one day. So he shows up in my dental practice. The interesting thing is his father and I went to high school together. And his father was very unruly, and Gilbert was exactly like him. So Gilbert comes in, and he sits down in the chair, and he looks me straight in the face. This is a 7-year-old talking. He said, see that tooth over there, that black hole in it? I want you to take it out. And I said, Gilbert, why do you want me to take it out? He said, I just do. I said, well, let's take an x-ray of it first. Took an x-ray and everything, and I said, Gilbert, I said, I have some pretty good news. I said, we're going to be able to save that tooth. We just need to put a real neat filling in there for you. Stop the decay. He said, nope, I want it taken out. And I said, Gilbert, why are you so adamant about wanting this tooth taken out? He said, look. He said, I'll take it out, I'll put it under my pillow, I'll get some money, and I'll buy that football I've been needing. I said, Gilbert, I got an idea. It's almost Christmas. I said, why don't we fill that tooth and save it for you, and then maybe Santa Claus will bring you a football. He said, no chance at all. I've been a bad boy all year. When we first went back to Hemphill, I found out that the high school didn't have a math professor anymore. And since I had, even though I was pre-dent, when I was in college, math was my easiest subject. I always made straight A's, didn't matter if it was advanced math or what it was. So to make sure my grade point average stayed up, I took 20 or 30 hours of math classes, all kind of advanced stuff, differential equations and all kind of stuff that had nothing to do with dentistry, but I just wanted to keep my grade points up. So I found out they didn't have a math teacher up at the school. So I went up to the principal that I knew, same one that was there when I was there, and I told him I'd be willing to teach if we could fix the curriculum properly. And so we did. So I taught 3 classes, Algebra 1, Algebra 2, and Geometry in high school, 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, and 10 o'clock. And at 11 o'clock, I was back in my office till 5, so I could still see patients in the same day. And that way I made a little extra money at the school for teaching. Another thing that was interesting about that class is my Algebra 2 class contained 2 people that are very prominent in my life. One is my sister, Charlotte, who's 11 years younger than me, and the other one is Sylvia, who is now my wife. I taught her Algebra 2 in high school. I never liked to have a lot of free time. I like to do stuff. So I did the math thing along with my dental practice. But I'd been reading a lot about sailboats, and I wanted to learn how to sail. And so I found a fiberglass sailboat kit you could buy. It came flat, and you bent the parts to form a bow and so forth. So Dad let me use one of his warehouses, and so I'd work on that some at night until I got it built. And it was a 16-foot sailboat with a centerboard with 150 feet of sail, and so Toledo Bend is just coming up then. And so I sailed it out around Toledo Bend, and then when I went into the Air Force, then I got stationed in Florida, so I had a trailer built for it, and I hauled it to Florida, and then we sailed all around the edge of Miami, Homestead, all through there a lot in sailboat. We do that a lot on weekends, Linda and Lori and I. Went out on the sailboat almost every weekend when the weather was decent. Vietnam was starting up, and they were starting to draft people my age. And they were drafting married people too. So that wasn't enough of a deterrent. So I got a few letters written around town from prominent businessmen to the draft board asking that they needed us there as a dentist. Please draft somebody else from a city or something. And it worked for a little while. And then the draft board, there was a guy on the draft board that was a friend of my parents, and he told him, he said, it's not going to work. Next cycle around, they're going to draft Ron. So I decided instead of being drafted, why don't I pick my branch of the service to go to? I had a friend in Dallas who had an uncle in the Air Force who was attached to the assignment division where everybody went. And he said, well, we can probably get you a really good assignment if you go in the Air Force. So I ended up joining the Air Force. Got a good assignment out of him, went to Homestead, Florida for 8 or 10 months until I got the letter, while on your tour in Southeast Asia, blah, blah, blah. So they sent me from there to Vietnam. It was a standard draft board, but they had both the enlisted and the officer divisions. And so they would get a request for professional people, doctors, dentists, that kind of thing. And that went through the part, because we were going to go in as officers. Went to Wichita Falls for a couple of months, and it was called OBMTM 68N, Officers Basic Military Training in 1968 Class N. We didn't have to do a lot of calisthenics or anything like the enlisted people did, but we had to learn to march in parades and stuff or something. But I learned a lesson accidentally that I think they were trying to teach us, but they couldn't say it. And that was the haircuts. Back then, it was popular to have longer hair. Not longer shoulder length, just didn't fit military standards in terms of being fairly close cut. So they inspected us the first day. They actually walked down the line, and the guy took our name and number down and looked at our haircuts and said, you need to go get a haircut. You need to go get a haircut. You need to go get a haircut. So I didn't have a problem. I didn't have very long hair. I didn't have a problem going straight to military standards with it. So I just went to the barber on base. I said, make me a military haircut. And he did. Some of the guys were fighting it. Some of the guys would say, okay, take a little off. Maybe that'll satisfy them. Da-da-da-da-da. Next morning, we go back in. We get inspected again. And it was really interesting. We were assigned a barracks where we could sleep. And the next morning, suddenly, those of us that had nice haircuts got daily allowances to go to a motel. And the ones that didn't have good haircuts got awarded the barracks. So I learned a subtle lesson that if you obey the rules and try to play by their rules and learn how to live within them, that it was to your advantage. I kind of liked it in a couple of different ways. One of it was the regimen. I didn't think I'd like the regimen until I got in it, and it actually simplifies your life. Some of the choices are taken away from you, and some people rebel against that. You have to live a certain way. You have to go where they say you have to go and all that stuff. But actually, it had a certain freedom to it because it let me concentrate on the rest of my life and enjoy that to the fullest that it was possible at the time wherever I was. So I actually enjoyed a lot about it. Considered becoming a career officer at one point. Truthfully, they shouldn't have given me one. That's my opinion. You think of a Bronze Star medal, and not a lot of people get them, but you think of the guy on the battlefield that hauled his buddy who was injured through mire and got him back and all that stuff. And, of course, none of that kind of stuff happened. And to me, that's what the medals are meant for, and that's who the people should have gotten them. The only thing that I did, the military at that time had a program going on, a subtle program, where they were trying to show the local Vietnamese people who weren't involved in the war effort that Americans were nice people and Americans cared about them. And so they had an optional program that you could sign up for to do, dentists and doctors could do, where we would go on these missions out into the local people, go to the orphanages and so forth around, and the doctors would prescribe medications, take medications along, help these people with ointments for rashes and whatever they could to help them. And then we would go to a an area that was set up there for us with a very basic stuff. We couldn't do fillings as dentists, but we could do extractions. And so we would go there and do extractions for people. We had a couple of people on board with the trucks we went out in who were standing around with AR-15s or AK-47s or whatever they were, automatic weapons that were protecting us. And we never really got into trouble, but it was optional because we were actually in uncontrolled Vietnamese land areas, and so we could have gotten shot. I never got shot at. I never got shot. It really wasn't all that dangerous, but I think because it was optional and those of us that elected to go ahead and do it, they decided they wanted to award us some way, and I was shocked when I got the medal. They had no dental care at all. As a matter of fact, this place where we went and set up a field chair, we called it. It was a fold-up chair that you could fold out. It had no padding or anything. People could be on it for you to examine them. We went to some kind of a community center for the local Vietnamese community, and there was a lady there who was in charge of it, a Vietnamese lady who spoke fairly good English. And because of the varied nature of the kind of things we could afford, they actually, those of us in the dentistry field, would teach her things about how to be a dentist. And so she became very good at extracting teeth herself. So we gave her sets of instruments and stuff so she could help the local people too. She probably charged them, but that's okay. At least the services were kind of available for extractions. The most amazing part of me going out there and doing that had to do with the end of the day. So we'd go out early in the morning, but we were required to be back on base by 3 o'clock in the afternoon. They didn't want us out there overnight. And if we had car trouble, if we shot for 3 o'clock, then if we had trouble, we could phone in. They could bring another vehicle out and haul us in. So at 2 o'clock, we had to shut down the dental clinic part so we could load up and get back. And the people would be lined up out the door, and we couldn't get through all of them. And we would put them in the chair, asking them which tooth hurt the most. They knew the only thing we were doing was extractions. They'd point to one. If they pointed to two, we could say, no, only one. And so they'd pick the one they wanted. We'd anesthetize 4 or 5 of them, let them sit on the bench, and then get them back up and then take them out one at a time to speed up the process and be able to treat more people. It doesn't matter that we were doing this. We still ran out of time. There was always a line of people left. Without exception, every single time I went out, and I probably went out about 40 times in the year I was there, every single time I went out, the next 3 or 4 people in line would tell the lady through the interpreter, it's okay, no anesthetic, take the tooth out. So the last 3 or 4 extractions I did, every time I went out, where whoever happened to be the next people in line, not one of them ever flinched. Not one of them. The people's discipline is unbelievable. How people could tolerate the pain and discomfort, I don't know. And if you get too fast at extracting a tooth, you could break it off easily. Then you got a bigger problem than they had to start with. So you had to take enough time to make sure you got the entire tooth out. So there's a limit to how much you can speed that process up. But it just blew me away that every single time I went out, the next 3 or 4 people said the same thing. And so we'd extract what we could, and then we had to leave. I thought the base where we were, it was an Air Force base, so this was the primary entry and exit point for troops that were transporting in and out of country. So it was a huge Air Force base, and it was on an island, big island, called Cameron Bay. And I was impressed with the efficiency with which this operation was run over there. They always had to be concerned about people coming in and trying to destroy stuff there. The periphery of the island, which was sand 90% of the way around the island, was guarded by people on the shoreline 24/7. And they had sandpans, for example, that would come in and look like fishing boats, but they had these huge motors inside. And they had the periphery marked out a safe distance. And these people watching the shore 24/7, if they got inside the boundary, they'd fire across their bow. And if that didn't make them leave, well, then they would actually mow them down and sink the ship. And we had, in Vietnam, they had, for entertainment for us troops, they had outdoor theaters on the beach. And so after dark, you'd be out there sitting on the beach, watching a movie, and many, many times I'd see these tracer bullets go out and a sandband taking off at 40 or 50 miles an hour. I mean, these things were heavily powered. So they were trying to come in and sneak in, and as far as I know, they never got in because we had such tremendous peripheral control of this huge island. It was really a huge island connected to the mainland by a bridge. So I was impressed with the fact that the military machine, people gripe a lot about it, but it's really necessary in that environment in order to efficiently do the jobs that have to be done. And so they did it extremely well. And it gave me an appreciation for our military and the structure behind how it's all set up. It's inefficient money-wise sometimes, the way they have to do things, but it has a reason and it has a purpose to some degree. And so we never had anybody infiltrate the base that killed anybody on the base. So we lived in a barracks, basically, a big common latrine in the middle of a big long barracks, and it was screen-fronted because Vietnam's tropical climate year-round, no heaters or anything, no air conditioning. But of course, we scrounged some plywood and sealed up the front, and then we scrounged an air conditioner, and then I knew how to wire stuff up, so we scrounged some wiring and stuff and found a fuse box, and so we had an air-conditioned suite after a while. I didn't like being away from my family. New young daughter that I was so attached to, with my wife that I was so attached to, and I didn't like being away. But a neat thing happened there. No email again, no text messaging. She wrote me letters 4 or 5 days a week. It made a huge difference, and I kept those letters for years and years and years. She kept me up on what she was doing, what's happening in her life, how Lori was growing, the cute things she said. I reread those letters 100 times. It made it worthwhile. It made it be not such a big sacrifice because I could keep in touch through letters. In Vietnam, recreational services had a lot of things they would do for people to spend their time doing. And we worked at the dental clinic for 5.5 days a week. We were off around 1 o'clock on Saturday, and so there was Saturday afternoon and all day Sunday. And they had small outboard boats that you could ski behind, and they had skis you could borrow and so forth too. So yeah, we did some of my buddies and I would go get a boat and go skiing, and there was a little bay there that was protected, and so we did some skiing there. It wasn't competition type skiing, it wasn't sophisticated like I'm into now, but it was still a lot of fun. They also had scuba diving available. And the waters off Vietnam are the clearest I've ever seen in my entire life. The underground, the flora and the fish and everything is unbelievably tropical. And so we had a beach that was designated as an officer's beach. It was a bigger beach designated as the enlisted beach. But we would go there on Sundays, and you could go off, you could scuba dive off the shore, and in 100 feet, you were in 100 feet of water. And so we could do all the scuba diving we wanted to, and it was all very nominally priced. And so they did a lot of stuff to keep us entertained when we weren't on duty. They also had handball courts there, and I played a lot of handball. Good recreational sport. I also I was into jogging at the time. And I was jogging 1, 2, 3 miles a day, usually early in the morning before I'd go to the clinic. And so I got in probably the best shape I've ever been in my life. My average time, I'd never run in high school or anything, but I was running like 6.5 minute miles when I'd run a mile. I'd average like 6 3/4 to 7 minute miles when I'd run 2 miles, or I was around 7:15 a mile when I was running 3 miles. So I ran pretty much seven days a week. So I got in tremendous shape. I enjoyed the military in the time we were there. We got to do a lot of stuff, went to Vietnam, went from there to Spain, got to travel through Europe, take flights over to Bangkok and India. And as you got close to the end of your tour in Vietnam, you could state a preference for where you'd like to be stationed. And they would give us preferential treatment on giving us that choice over someone moving from stateside to that location. And so I picked Spain and Germany as my choices over in Europe, and we got Spain. And so we stationed at Torrejon Air Force Base just outside Madrid. When we got to Spain, they had a flying club on base, and they had a 172 there that I joined the club and could fly that around. And That was absolutely fabulous. It was really an experience. I didn't speak any Spanish when I got over there. Most of the people we interacted with over there spoke fairly good English, but took some courses and learned enough Spanish to get around and go to restaurants where they didn't have English-speaking people and order food and do what we needed to do. They had snow skiing in Spain, and it was amazing, everything that was available there. And then we did a driving tour through all of Europe in a 1969 Chevrolet Impala convertible. And in Segovia, where the roads were built for horses and carts, the buildings were irregularly placed on the side of the road. And so cutting through the middle of town, I got the bumpers stuck between two buildings and had to back this long American car out about 2 miles to get out of it. So there were all kind of strange things that happened that you don't expect to happen over there. But overall, it was an amazing experience. There's some things about Spain that are very unique. They have these hostels there. You can go and you can only stay. It's kind of like a bed and breakfast over here without the breakfast. But you can only stay one night. And they were just $1 to stay overnight or something. And they were these old restored houses that were 200, 300, 400 years old. 4-poster beds, all the ornate stuff in the ceiling and around the walls. And it was quite an experience. And so Linda and I and Lori traveled doing that stuff a good bit too. Angie was born over there, and she had so she had Spanish citizenship and American citizenship. If you're born of 2 American citizens in a foreign country, you're still an American citizen. So until she was 18, she was a Spanish citizen. At age 18, you had to go in for mandatory 2-year military service. Everybody, rich people, poor people, everybody in Spain. If you don't do that, you have to renounce your citizenship, or it's renounced automatically for you. Well, of course, we were back here, and she didn't do anything, and so she lost that citizenship. But yes, she was there. But she was born with a heart defect, a major congenital defect, and so we got reassigned short of being 4 years over there, which was the original plan. So then we went back to Lackland Air Force Base where she could get some better care. So then we moved to San Antonio out of Spain, and I was in the dental clinic, of course, there. And she caught some kind of infection, Angie did, when she got there. And she couldn't keep food down and all kind of problems. When she was 1 year old, she had shrunk down to about 11 pounds. And she almost died. And they did a procedure called hyperalimentation on her, which basically saved her life. They do a vein cut down on the neck so that they can run higher concentration glucose into her body. If you try to run standard glucose in, there's too much water volume, the kidneys can't get rid of it, so you can't get very many calories in. But with hyperalimentation, they could hyper-infuse that to give her the calories. And so she finally turned around and started getting more healthy, and then she fought off the infection herself, and then she continued to develop. Fortunately, never had to have heart surgery, but that was a consideration originally. It was awful. It was coming from the thing where my family felt so full and wonderful with the first child who was perfectly normal, and then getting into the second child that had special problems made me feel even closer to her in many senses, but also at the same time very frustrated at not being able to do anything myself except present her to people that hopefully could help her. So yeah, it was a very trying time for Linda and me. When we were in San Antonio, I'd always had an interest in orthodontics. When we were presented the limited amount of information about orthodontics while in general dental school, I got fascinated by some of the concepts and studied a little on my own, learned a little on my own, realized how much there was to learn there. Again, it was one of those things where I found something else I wanted to learn. It's kind of what it amounted to. In the Air Force, you could be a specialist. They had orthodontists in the Air Force, but they didn't want very many of them. They'd rather have general dentists, which were more applicable to all the normal troops. Orthodontists were primarily then for the dependents of troops. And so the orthodontists were mostly overseas. So I talked to them a little bit about whether I could be an orthodontist in the Air Force. And they basically said no. They said it might happen, but probably no. So I decided to apply to orthodontic school. Didn't know if I could even get in. because I had heard stories that they have about 100 to 150 applicants per year, and they take 6 or 10 or whatever it was. And I thought, okay, we'll let God decide. So I applied, went through all the stuff to apply, went in for interviews and all that kind of stuff, not really expecting to get in. But when I got accepted, well, then I had a decision to make. So I went back to the Air Force people above me and said, I've been accepted. This is what I want to do in my life. Can I do this in the Air Force? And they said, sorry, we don't need anybody right now. So I resigned from the Air Force and then went into orthodontic school for 24 months and so forth, and proceeded from there. But that's the reason I got out of the Air Force, just because they couldn't use me in the field that I decided I wanted to be in for the rest of my professional career. I was in ortho school from 72 to 74, yeah.
And where was your ortho school?
University of Texas in Houston, back at my old dental school there. So UT College, UT Dental School, UT Orthodontic School, sort of. I loved every minute of it. It was fascinating. It was so much fun. I told my wife one time, I said, you know, if we could afford to do it, I'd just be a professional student. I love learning new stuff. But of course, that's not practical. So my wife Linda had a miscarriage. We had 2 girls. We wanted another baby. So she got pregnant again, but lost it. And so we're in orthodontic school talking about this. And she said, I had a little trouble getting pregnant this last time. I'm getting a little older. Said, I may not even be able to get pregnant. So we said, maybe we ought to just get off all birth control and let nature take its course and see what happens. She got pregnant the first month. And so Greg was born while I was in orthodontic school. So really? that complicated life a lot. But we didn't expect that. So you can't ever plan these things. But I wouldn't trade him for the world. It's great. Glad it happened the way it happened. Glad all my kids happened the way they happened, even though none of them were what we expected or what we thought would happen or how it'd work out. It worked out great. The area was expanding and growing well, and it was mostly middle-class families, so you didn't have an element there of people who might not be as responsible for your kids to associate with. So it looked like for them to grow up in a reasonably responsible area was a good thing. And so it turned out that Lori, my oldest, started 9th grade in a brand new high school that was built. And so that looked really good. Then my other kids went through there too. By the time Greg got there into high school, it had gotten to have so many poorly educated from questionable family kids in it that the gangs were starting, the problems like that were occurring. So we considered pulling him out and putting him in a private school, try to get him into a little better environment of other kids to be with. Well, we talked to him about it, and he said, I've learned how to not confront them, and I've learned how to not get in trouble with them. So I'd really rather stay with my friends. We've all learned how to deal with it. And so fortunately, he never really had any major problem, and he stayed there anyway. But the area now is not as favorable an environment as it was at the time my kids were starting through it. So it looked like a good place for them to be without me having to go to private schools for all of them initially. Laurie got into drill team and those types of things in high school, and so that was going on. Angie got into soccer. She was their goalie, and she loved soccer, and so we went through those kinds of things. Greg got into a variety of things that he didn't really carry anything all the way through school for a long time. He'd get interested in this for a while and get interested in that for a while. He was in the band for a few years and so forth. He was just had too many interests in too many different places to stay focused on one thing. I think is what happened. Kind of like I did when I was at the same age. So when I was at Lackland and still in the Air Force, a couple of my dental friends were big into radio control model airplanes, and they got me interested in it. I was interested in aviation and the lift from the airplanes and all that, like I mentioned earlier, and so they got me interested in it, and I started building planes there. When we moved to, when I got out of the Air Force and we moved to Houston, I was in school and all. I had one airplane that I still had that was in good shape and all, and it stayed in the attic for years. And when Greg got to be about 6 or 7, he discovered that airplane, and he already had an interest in airplane. So he started saying, "Dad, will that thing fly?" We need to fly it. So he kind of got me back into it. So then I got it down, cleaned the engine up, got it running. Now the radios were more modern, so we got a new radio, joined the flying club, started flying. He was mesmerized. He learned very, very fast. And so it was a father-son thing we do on weekends, and he seemed to really enjoy it. A couple of years ago, started talking to people and hearing about electrics, how electrics are now the big thing. You don't have to have the glow fuel and all the mess, and the airplanes don't have to be as heavy because the electric engines are so much lighter, and the lithium batteries are so much lighter now. So kind of got back into it a couple of years ago for several reasons. One is, at 79, time I can water ski is limited. I mean, someday I'm going to have to quit. I don't have any plans right now, but someday I'm going to have to quit. And if I do, I got to do something. I'm not a sit-at-home, watch TV person very much. I kind of like to do stuff. So I decided to get back into it, and now I'm loving it. I'm having a good time, and it's something fun to do. I got 3.5 acres of field right back here that's a drainage area. But these little real light ones, I don't have a runway back there, so the bigger ones have to take off on a runway. I have to go to the flying club to do that. But the smaller little light foamy ones there, I can just throw them up in the air and fly them and land them in the grass, and it doesn't hurt anything. I recognized earlier on that if I'm going to get into some other area, learning from people that know how to do that has a value. And so it's easier to get into a new hobby, easier to get into some new interest if I can learn from people who know more about it than I do. So that drew me there too. So while I was in orthodontic school, I was already in Houston. It was easier to research Houston than it was anyplace else. I was already there. I did look at a few other places, Beaumont, Pearland, different places around some too. Talked to a lot of people there. But Houston had an area that geographically appeared to have a lot of people and not any orthodontists very close. That was in Aldine. So I thought I would go there. And so I set my practice up in Aldine. And back in those days, we weren't allowed to advertise. And there were no dental programs to get on. There was no way to get patients other than word of mouth. So you could put a 2-column inch ad in one paper for a maximum of 2 weeks, announcing your practice was open. You couldn't advertise prices, free exams, anything. So that obviously, I did it, but that did no good. It didn't do anything. And so practice started very, very slowly. So I spent some time trying to go over to the high school and meet some people and talk to classes about anything, decay, dentistry, whatever, try to get my name out there. And it worked to some degree, and I got patients, but it just built very slowly. So I found an office that an endodontist was using 2 days a week up on 1960, a little further north, a little more affluent area. And he would rent me a little time in his space when he wasn't there, lowered his rent, gave me an opportunity to get my foot in the door. And that practice exploded. I was working part-time for other orthodontists around. They'd go on vacation or something or whatever. And I'd done a lot of that. And another orthodontist down in the Clear Lake area, he and I got along great. And his practice was huge, and he didn't want to work that hard. And he actually offered for me to move down there. And had he done it a year before, I would have taken it. But by this time, my practice on 1960 was exploding, and I was living in that area. So I closed the Aldine office, moved those patients up to 1960. It wasn't far enough that they could come. And I still kept getting referrals out of Aldine some too. And because they had to go this far to get to an orthodontist since I wasn't back there anymore. And so that worked well. And then I moved to another office and then another office on 1960 and finally moved up to Champions Forest and in the Glenlock Farms area. And it's where I had my last practice when I took on my partner, and we shared the space up there until I retired to take care of Linda when she had cancer. Must have been around 2000. And we took a trip to Florida one summer to see her parents, took the kids, flew down there. And on the way down there, I thought she was just putting on a little weight. I'd noticed it for a while, but I hadn't thought too much about it. It wasn't really a major concern for me. But it turned out that she had ovarian cancer. And one of the symptoms of ovarian cancer is fluid retention in your stomach area. And it got to be such a big problem that she was unable to eat much. She had a lot of problems. She got back, took her in, did all the tests, discovered it. She had ovarian cancer pretty far advanced. It had already metastasized around. So the doctor said the 20% survival rate's about 5 years at the stage where she was, with all the chemo we could give her, with all the radiation, with everything. So handwriting was on the wall. And so I knew it was going to go down. And so I was teaching part-time down at the orthodontic department at the dental school. And so I meet the residents that come through, and this one resident and I just hit it off. We got along great. He was a great guy, real smart fella, learned quickly, had good hands. He could do good work. And so when he got out of school, I sold him half of my practice. And then we practiced together for 3 years until she got to a point where she couldn't really drive it. She wasn't supposed to be driving anymore, and I needed to take care of her. So then I totally retired and took care of her 24/7 for about the last 8 or 9 months of her life. Her faith was not extremely strong. She was definitely a Christian. She definitely believed. She wasn't actively involved in the church or anything. She wasn't an active Bible reader, nor was I at the time. It never got mentioned between the two of us back when she could still communicate well that why did God do this? That's a question a lot of people ask themselves. We never asked that question. We accepted it as what happened. We don't know why, but it happened. We have to live with it. We have to do the best we can with it. We have to move on. And so she never got bitter about it. I was frustrated because it was, again, a substance just like with my middle child, with Angie, where I couldn't do anything about it. So I'd do the best I could to make it as good as it could be and accept it for what it was. So, like I said, I never asked myself the question, why did God do this to me, like a lot of people do? I was frustrated about it. It made me question my faith. It made me question where this was going, where the rest of my life was going to go. And as she continued to go down, where it became inevitable she was going to die because she was on the chemo, she'd done the radiation when it metastasized to her brain and the whole bit. But it was very obvious that that had an ending to it. So I decided to put it on the back burner, not plan for anything. I was retired. I was financially okay. We had insurance that covered a lot of the stuff, so it wasn't a major medical expense. It was expensive, but it wasn't prohibitive. So I said, that part will work itself out. I said, I don't know where I'm going to go from it, but right now I'm not going to focus on it. I'll figure it out when I get there. So for the first time in my life, I decided not to plan ahead. I decided to be focused totally on what I could do for her and did everything I could do, took her to whatever doctors I thought would have an advantage over another one, anything it would be, and just told God to tell me what to do. And when she did finally pass away, even though I'd had, in a sense, 4.5 years to grieve, I knew it was coming, and the closer it got, the more obvious it became. It still was a tremendous shock. It was a total disruption of my whole life, the part of my life I'd loved, and still did at the time, even spending that kind of reduced quality time with her. It was a big shock, but I accepted it for what it was and decided I needed to move on. When she was gone, kids were around, family was around, stuff for a long time, but eventually there was a time when I was alone. And so I was totally lost. I didn't know where to go. My old partner from my orthodontic practice called me. The practice had exploded. He begged me to come back and work a day or two a week, whatever I could do. And I was about to decide to do that because I loved orthodontics. And Greg called me one day. He said, Dad, you used to fly a lot. I said, yeah. I said, you haven't done it for 10 or 15, 20 years. I said, yeah. He said, I want to start an aerial photography business. And he said, I don't know how to run a business. You do. You could help me with that. You need to go back and get current and get your pilot license upgraded and all, and you can fly for me and I can take pictures. So we did that. Well, having that extra interest, getting me back into flying that I had always loved, learning the new stuff that was now available, new electronics, the new navigations, everything, kept me going enough that I never went back to orthodontics because I fulfilled everything with this.
Okay, you got this set like you want it?
Yeah. Okay, you can stop right here and do your run up here.
Okay. Where is it? Where's the RPM? Right
here.
there? Arizona Municipal Skyhawk 775 Golf Tango. We're approaching runway 35. We'll be taking off and staying in the area. Arizona Municipal.
The traffic, Aero 66 Julie. We're on about a 3-mile final for runway 35.
Okay, so do a slight, just pick up the nose a little bit right there. What do you think about all the gauges and stuff?
Yeah, it's neat. I got to get reoriented, but yeah, it's really neat.
Yeah.
I love what you've done to this airplane, man. It's just awesome.
Yeah.
All right, we're going to come back down. That aircraft is almost clear of the runway. We're going to come back down and do the downwind, opposite direction of our takeoff. We'll do a low flyby for you from, it'll be from your left to your right. Copy that, thank you.
So how do you think the filming went?
So Robert Alpha, taxi back to 35.
I think it went really well. The guy's really neat. I really liked him. Easy to talk to. He drew me out real well.
Yeah. You can tell he's a trained interviewer, huh?
He certainly is.
Yep, so traffic Skyhawk 775 Golf Tango on our right base for runway 17, low approach only. Navasota traffic.
That was fun.
That was fun.
So anything you talked about that was kind of, did you like, oh man, I wish I hadn't have said that? No, not at all. Not at all.
Not at all.
Well, good, man. I'm glad you had fun with it.
It was fun. A lot of fun.
Kind of fun thinking back through all those old stories and stuff and kind of rehashing them in your head.
Absolutely. Navasota Municipal, Fox Golf Tango, short final runway 35, Navasota Municipal.
And if you hold a little power on the end of the flare, it makes a really nice touchdown. Little bouncy. All right.
Navasota Municipal, 5 Golf Tango, clearly active. Navasota Municipal.
And Navasota 6 Juliet taking runway 35 for a left traffic pattern, Navasota.
Traffic, 6 o'clock, same altitude, less than 1 mile.
That's cool. All right.
Avionics, make sure.
Avionics.
And then I got more heavily back into the water skiing, which I was already in, but I got off of it for a while when I was taking care of Linda. We used to go to Lake Travis, even though we lived in the Houston area, had a Sea Ray boat, and we used to drag it up to Lake Travis. We had a travel trailer. We'd drag that up to Lake Travis, and we'd spend approximately every other weekend there for most summers when all the kids were at home. So water skiing became a big part of what we were doing in with the camping part. And I had a friend who I went through orthodontic school with, Les Lagerquist, who was an orthodontist in Tomball. And he ended up doing the same thing, got into motorhomes and boats, and that he ended up buying a place on Lake Travis. And so then we switched over and started going there every 2 weeks in the summers with him, and built a boat dock together so we could keep our boats up there, didn't have to trailer them back and everything. So the water and water skiing became a part of the family over time, and it was enjoyable, but it still wasn't a passion for me at this point. Where it got into the passion stage is as the kids left home, or most of them were gone, Greg was still at home, we weren't doing that as much. As the girls got older, they were involved in other things. They didn't want to go away for the weekend, and so it kind of died down for quite a few years. But Greg got with someone else and found out about slalom courses, and there was one over in the river over by Kingwood. And so he talked me into going out and trying to slalom ski in my old slalom ski, which was a very poor quality ski compared to what was available at the time, and still in even more sophistication now. Greg, when he was in high school, got together with a guy who skied a course. And so he talked me into coming into skiing one time at this slalom course in the San Jacinto River outside Kingwood. And the first time I skied, it just mesmerized me. This was the most amazingly hard thing I'd ever thought I'd ever have to do on the water. Everything else on the water had just been easy, just no discipline or anything, just go out and have a good time and quit. So that got my interest, and still I'm interested. So in spite of the accident and all the stuff that I had happened with all that. June 22nd, 2012, I was practicing it. I was skiing at this point. I was skiing at competition ski lakes. These are man-made ski lakes, long, skinny bodies of water. They're about a half mile long, a couple hundred yards wide. They taper the shores at 10 to 1. So when the boat goes down through there, the wakes go up on the shore and die and trickle back into the lake, so you don't have rollers. My ski partner and I were skiing, and there was just two of us there, and there was nobody around. There's no houses around or anything. And in slalom skiing, when you make a pass, then they shorten the rope, and you come back and try to make another pass, and they shorten the rope, and eventually you're going to miss. And I was skiing at 35 off. It was 75-foot rope, so the rope's only 40 feet long, and it's 37 feet 9 inches out to the turn buoy, so you don't have a whole lot of extra room. And I was skiing at 35 off, and I made one ball and I made two ball, and I was coming up to 3 and extended my arm to stretch the ski out and try to get around the buoy, and realized I was going to be about 4 inches short, and my ski was going to hit the buoy. Well, when that happens, you fall. And I knew I was going to fall, but I fall all the time. It didn't bother me. I didn't think anything about it. It turned out the particular position I was in, when I hit the buoy, threw me forward, and just as it did, I released the handle, but the triangle of the handle at the end of the ski rope was right there in the air, and I launched forward, and the ski rope handle went up to my armpit, and the 300 horsepower motor is still going on the boat, pulling. So the aluminum core on the handle got bent into a tight V, and the tight V grabbed my triceps, my biceps, triceps, and all these muscles. This was all ripped off. The biceps was torn completely loose and lost in the lake. The triceps was ripped in half. Half of it was laying down here. The pec was torn loose. So all the muscles were torn loose from the arm. I came up in a sea of blood with some pain, and my ski partner finally realized I wasn't back there. Saw that I was back in a bunch of blood. He came back, he grabbed me by my life jacket, pulled me up on the transom of the boat, beached the boat, got in his car, and went for help. Why he didn't call on his cell phone, I have no idea, but he left. So I'm sitting on the back of the boat, and my arm's hanging in the water, and I can't move it because all the muscles are gone. And I look across the lake, and I start to get tunnel vision. I'm starting to lose peripheral vision. I can just crawl in there like that. And that's what happens when you don't have enough oxygenated blood to your eyes. So I knew it meant I was bleeding out. There's nobody around. I'm there by myself. So I reached down and I looked at my arm, and between here and here, there was nothing but bone. That's the only thing I could see. So I picked my arm up and put it in my lap, on the transom of the boat, and I just said, God, I said, if you're ready for me to come home to heaven, I'm ready to go. I know you're going to take care of my family. I'm not worried about anything. Whatever you decide, I'm here. And I waited a little bit, and my vision got a little bit worse. And I said, God, I said, if you're not going to take me home, if you got something else for me to do on this earth, I said, you need to send me a sign. Just let me know. As soon as I finished saying that, pain went away totally. My vision returned to normal, and I looked down and it wasn't bleeding anymore. Talk about miracles. So I never passed out. Life Flight got there, and the medics came over, and they said, I heard them talking, they said, man, an injury like that, we got to put a tourniquet. He said, why? I looked at it. It's not bleeding. Don't know why, but it's not bleeding. And so then they came around and they said, well, how are we going to get him? See, my feet were in the water. I was in about 3 feet of water on the transom of the boat. How are we going to get him out? And they were talking. I said, don't you have one of those backboards? They said, what? I said, those backboards you put people on, they have injuries. Yeah. Well, I said, well, bring it over here. I'll roll over on it. You can take me to the helicopter. So I was lucid enough. My point is I was lucid enough to be able to figure out something. That's supposed to be their field. They should have thought of that, but they didn't. But anyway. So they took me down to Memorial Hermann. The miracles just are amazing that happened. The surgeon who was on call had a specialty in hand and arm surgery. All these muscles that were torn loose, he knew where to reattach them to the bone. So they operated on me for 9 hours the first time. And they reattached the triceps muscle. They didn't think it would make it. The skin was also gone here, so in front where the biceps was lost. So they couldn't close the wound up. All they could do was put stuff back together as best they could. I didn't have any feeling in my hands at all. All the nerves were damaged to the point where I had no feeling. I had no control of these fingers at all. So he repaired everything that he could. And then I stayed in the hospital for a while, and they did 6 operations in the next 5 weeks, basically going in looking for dead tissue. They said they expected it to occur, and it never happened. They said this injury in a lake, just a plain old lake, is going to be infection and all that. Never happened. Didn't have any infections. I didn't have any significant dead tissue. The triceps is totally functional. I can do push-ups again. The sensation came back in my fingers. It's been almost 8 years, and it's still not 100%, but I got about 90% sensation in my fingers. That all came back. This little muscle right here that he repaired too is designed to rotate your arm and stuff like that. But because it goes across my elbow, he told me you might be able to exercise that a little bit, and you might get enough strength that you can raise your arm, the weight of your arm up or something. So I exercised it pretty extensively, and I can lift about 3 pounds with it now. About 2 pounds, 2.5. He didn't think I could ever get to where I could lift this. So the miracles just went on and on and on and on. About the second or third operation, we're sitting outside ready to go into the room. And he said, this nurse wants to meet you. He's standing out waiting for the room to get prepped. He said, nurse wants to meet you. So she came over and met me. She was a short lady, white hair, maybe 5 feet tall, real slight of frame. She had a different look about her. I couldn't quite figure it out, but she just looked different. She looked extremely pleasant. She looked extremely like she was just a happy person. She almost had a glow about her, but not quite. But she was just unusual. And I already in twilight sleep, I really can't remember all the details, but I remembered this part of it. So I'm getting ready to check out of the hospital when they finally took some skin off my leg and finally closed the wound up and did the skin graft and said you can go home. So the PR nurse comes around and she said, well, how was your stay? What could we have done to make your stay better? You know how they do that. She said, you have any requests of me? And I said, yeah, I want to meet this nurse. She said, well, I know the whole surgical staff. Said, what was her name? I said, I don't know, but I said, I can describe her a little bit. And I said, I said, she's short, thin, like I just described, gray hair. She got real quiet. I said, "What's wrong?" And she said, "We don't have anybody on our staff like that." So I talked to the surgeon about it in subsequent visits and stuff. He said he'd never operated with her before, never operated with her since. Said she was the best surgical assistant he's ever worked with in his life. He said they were trying to decide whether to just cut my arm off rather than try to go through the extensive repair work involved with the questionable results. And he said I was on the fence trying to decide whether to take your arm off. And she came to me and she said, "You have to save his arm." Said she was so convincing that I decided to give it a try. So whoever she was, she made a difference because I now have a functional arm to help him make the decision to operate on me for 9 hours right after he just finished a 6-hour surgery. So I don't know. If you believe in angels, she was an angel. Somehow it happened. Well, I still loved skiing, but I could hardly even raise this arm right at first. But went through physical therapy and it got better. And so I was amazed at the number of people that contacted me in the skiing community from Canada, from Florida. They heard about the accident somehow. So this guy from Florida contacts me and he said, "I had the same injury. Are you having trouble making a fist?" And I said, "Yeah, I can just barely wiggle my fingers." He said, "I've invented this device. I kind of modified an existing device that lets you use that hand without depending on your grip." So they have these weightlifting hooks that Velcro around here, and they have a little hook on them which you can grab heavy weights. He said, "I took one of those and modified it, and then I modified the handle." And so he told me how to do it. So I had a special handle made with a short triangle on it and an extension about like this. Then I could hook that hook over the extension and put this finger, which I could barely use by then, over the rope, and that kept it from sliding off. So then when I wanted to fall, I just lifted this finger and it slid off. So if I fell, then I could get off. And so I finally got all that stuff put back together, got a life jacket that would help me with strength. It was a special life jacket that somebody come up with that had a strap around it, went to your gloves, so that the pull wasn't on your elbow and your shoulder. It was on a strap going around behind your back. So I got one of those vests. And one year to the day after my accident, I managed to get up on a slalom. Couldn't ski the course, but I could get up on a slalom and ease in and out of the wakes a little bit. So,
what was it like in your head? I mean, there has to be a sense of, I'm back on my feet. I mean,
well, it was very encouraging to be able to do that. At this time, I had no hopes that I would ever ski the slalom course again. I didn't think I would ever rehab up to that point. And also by this time, I'm 72. And so I figured, well, I'll probably never get back to doing this passion, but I've taken a lot of lessons and I know how to coach, and I'm an official judge and a driver. Of course, now I may not be able to drive, but I said, I can be in the sport. I can coach people. I can judge at tournaments and stuff. I said, I'll be happy with that if that's all I ever get to. And as time went on, it came back. I was able to strengthen it enough. I didn't need the hook anymore. And so I'll use a standard handle now. I say a standard handle. It's slightly modified. It's a handle they came out with in 2000, which is bent like this. So you put your hands on it like this instead of like this. And the reason is because in slalom skiing, you ski with one hand up, one hand down. And in order to do that, you have to be able to lay the handle over horizontally. And one of the restrictions I have in this arm is that I can't rotate this hand palm up. So I can't ski with a standard handle. Greg and I and this other guy, all three bought those handles when they came out, and we didn't like them. So I ended up with all three of them. I found them in my attic. So I got them out, had them restrung, new rope on them and everything. And so that's what I still ski with, because it allows me to ski like this. I don't have to turn a palm up. I tried switching to where I can turn it down. So I tried doing this. Never could get used to the feel. So I'm back to doing it like this. And so that's the way I ski now. It was about 2 or 3 years. And I got to where I could start skiing some local tournaments and stuff and regionals. And another thing happens when you get into my age group. It's divided in roughly 5-year age groups. And so I was in men's 8 at the time. I was now in men's 9. And in every age group, more and more people drop out for a variety of their reasons. So I had fewer and fewer competitors, so it was easier to perform well. So I went back to nationals and regionals and national competitions in 17 and came in 5th place nationally in 17 and 18. That in a nutshell is my story about my injury. We're all different, and the things we like and dislike and what moves us and doesn't move us is all a little bit different. For me, a slight sense of accomplishment every day in something even small is what keeps me going. The value of the slalom skiing for me is maybe one day I'll go out and I won't ski well at all. But I'll keep trying, and I'll have 1 or 2 buoys that I turned especially well. I did those 8 things I was trying to do at the same time for every turn, and only did it for 1 buoy, but that kept me going. I don't ski at near the level now I skied when I was younger. I just don't have the timing. I don't have the physical strength. I can't quite do it at quite the same level. So I have to lower my standards for myself. But there's still those special times while I'm on the course when I finally got it to work right. Now, maybe the next buoy I didn't do it right, but I did it that one time, and I remember it, and I come back, and the next time I do it twice like that, etc. I think having something to work on, having something to improve on in your life is one of the big values, right alongside having the love of people you love. My sister Charlotte and I lived side by side on Lake Conroe. I was just looking for some companionship, somebody to talk to. It wasn't really a strong drive in a sense in my case. I just needed to do something. I needed to be out meeting people, doing something. So she invited Sylvia, who was living in Nacogdoches, down to spend the weekend with her a couple of times, and I ran into her over there. We spent some time talking about old times and things we had in common from a long time ago, even though she was 11 years younger than me. We knew a lot of the same people. She practically grew up in my household. She knew my parents. I knew her. I knew her family. I knew her background. I knew what kind of basic person she was. Sylvia and I were first dating. First couple of times we saw each other, I didn't try kissing her or anything. I just tried to get to know her, and I didn't really know for sure if I really was interested in that part of our relationship. I didn't really know where it was going to go. I didn't think anything about it, but I had a 4-wheeler. She came down here to see my sister again next door, and so we were there on a Saturday, and so I said, let's go on a 4-wheeler ride. There was some country around there and stuff. We got on the 4-wheeler, and we're talking and riding around real slow and everything, and I said, I thought to myself, I said, I need to move this relationship forward a little bit. I'm really liking this lady. And so I said, I think it's time I need to kiss her. And we're off kind of in the woods, and we're over by this pond. So I stopped, and we got off, and so somehow I let her know that I wanted to kiss her, and she seemed reluctant. And so I just forced the issue anyway, went ahead and kissed her, and I thought, man, that wasn't very warm. What's going on here? What's happening to her? She said, we need to get out of here. I said, what? It turns out she's got a horrible fear of snakes, and we were down by a pond, and she saw a snake coming across the water, and it totally distracted her. So I thought our first kiss was a disaster, but I found out why. So anyway, when we started getting real serious, I found out she was dramatically different than Linda. And I always assumed, because Linda and I had such an excellent relationship through our marriage, no major problem. We had our disagreements about junk, but no major problems ever. I always assumed that if I ever got married again, it would be a similar woman. Sylvia's nothing like Linda. I mean, she's a woman, and she's pretty, but nothing like Linda. So many personality traits are totally different. Linda was very tactful. Linda would make sure she didn't say anything that hurt anybody's feelings. So she was, in that sense, politically correct, so to speak. You ask Sylvia a question, she's going to tell you the answer. She doesn't care whether you like the answer or not. And right at first, it was kind of hard to get used to. And once I got used to it, I realized the value in it. The value in it is you don't ever have to guess where she is. She's not playing games and being tactful. She's telling me like it is. And once I got used to it, I liked it a lot. And that turned out to be one of the draws that got us closer together. The one certainty in life is that it always changes. So in essence, there are no certainties in life. You don't know about health. You don't know about the future. You don't know about the people you're going to interact with. You don't know how they're going to change, how they're going to be your friend forever. You don't really know what the future brings. So you have to start with a base somewhere that gets you through the rough times, because everybody's going to have a rough time. And what the idea that I came up with recently, since we all have the good and the bad times in our lives, what do we do to make the bad times better? Can we feed off the good times better? So I decided, got these little books off the internet. I used to listen to a motivator, a guy named Tony Robbins. And one of Tony Robbins' big caveats is everybody's going to have a magic moment in their life once in a while. Remember and treasure the magic moments. And when you're not having any, remember the ones you've had. So in these little books, I've got a little section where I write down all the wonderful things that have happened in my life and are happening, and I write down my magic moments. And on the back of the book, going the other way, I write down prayer requests when people ask me to pray for them. I put that in there. So when I'm praying and thanking God, I have a list of my magic moments and all the special things I feel He's done for me in my life. And it's amazing how just going over that list makes me feel better. Even if I feel better to start with, it picks me up even more. So my magic moments, as Tony Robbins called them, my blessings from God, as I call them. So when I'm praying and thanking God, I got a list to remind me of all the things He's done for me.
What's something maybe perhaps small, maybe big, I don't know, to really appreciate at 79 that maybe at 20 you would have, or 30, you would have never known?
I think the interaction with other people who become true friends. I think the whole world is full of acquaintances. People's interactions with other people generally are acquaintances. And if you have the opportunity to really become a true friend and be a true friend for somebody else and have them be one for you, just having that special person in your life, male or female, makes a big difference. Both my wives were there for me. I have some male friends who are like that. Greg's that way for me. My kids are that way. They're always there for me. I don't think you can have enough true friends. They're hard to develop. They're hard to come by. But when you do, it's really special.